Live.
From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we have got the Bangalores, if you have got the debt cord, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the Blast Radius. Good to have you with us tonight. And since it is the 7th of June, which makes yesterday the 82nd anniversary of history's most audacious amphibious invasion, here we present, for your kind consideration, Curmudgeon's Field Guide to D-Day. 10 stories from Operation Overlord that you may not have heard, but you may have heard some of them, so we'll see. June 6, 1944 is one of those dates that has become so famous, we already think we know it pretty well. We think we know the broad outlines. We know the Higgins boats crashing through the surf. We know Omaha Beach. We know the paratroopers dropping behind enemy lines. We know Eisenhower's famous order of the day. We know that D-Day was the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. And because we know the ending, we tend to imagine that the story unfolded more or less according to plan. But in the event, it really didn't. The popular memory of D-Day often resembles a giant military machine functioning with clockwork precision. Hundreds of thousands of men moving exactly where they were supposed to move. Thousands of ships arriving exactly where they were supposed to arrive. Aircraft dropping troops exactly where they were supposed to drop them. The reality was considerably messier than that. Paratroopers landed miles from their intended targets. Landing craft arrived at the wrong beaches. Tanks sank to the bottom of the channel. Communications broke down. Entire units became mixed together in the dark. Officers were killed. Plans collapsed within hours of being written. In some places, Allied success was achieved not because the plan worked, but because ordinary soldiers and junior officers improvised when it did not. And yet somehow, despite all of that confusion, the largest amphibious invasion in human history succeeded. Today, I would like to look at 10 stories from Operation Overlord that illustrate just how strange, chaotic, tragic, courageous, and occasionally absurd D-Day really was. We'll meet a general who landed at the wrong beach and decided to invade France anyway. We'll meet a future Star Trek actor who nearly died from friendly fire, a Scottish bagpiper who strolled through machine gun fire, a handful of glider pilots who carried out one of the most daring operations of the entire war, and perhaps most importantly, we'll discover that one of history's greatest military victories was often held together by little more than courage, initiative, and a refusal to panic. Let's begin with an army of paratroopers that didn't actually exist. Number 1, the dummy paratroopers. One of the most successful Allied soldiers on D-Day was a man made of burlap. In the early hours of June 6th, while thousands of real American and British paratroopers were preparing to jump into occupied France, Allied planners launched one of the stranger operations of the war. They dropped hundreds of fake paratroopers. These dummies were officially nicknamed Ruperts. They were roughly human-sized, give or take, stuffed with straw or weighted materials and designed to look convincing from the ground, particularly in darkness. Some of them even contained explosives that would detonate after landing, helping to create the illusion that real troops had actually arrived. The idea was a simple one. The Allies knew that German commanders were already struggling to determine where the invasion would occur. Their intelligence services had spent months being fed misleading information through elaborate deception campaigns. Even after Allied troops began landing in Normandy, many German commanders remained convinced that the real invasion would eventually come elsewhere. The dummy paratroopers were intended to make an already confusing situation even more confusing. As the fake soldiers descended across parts of Normandy, specially trained teams from the British Special Air Service conducted complementary deception operations. They played recordings of gunfire and combat noises. Explosives were detonated. Various tricks were employed to convince German forces that large airborne formations had landed in places where no such formations existed. And the effect was surprisingly significant. German units were dispatched to investigate reports of airborne landings that had, in fact, never happened. Troops that might otherwise have been sent toward genuine Allied objectives found themselves chasing ghosts through the Norman countryside. This may sound like something from a Hollywood screenplay, but it reflected a very basic truth about warfare. Information is often more valuable than firepower. The Germans had plenty of soldiers. What they lacked was certainty. Every report arriving at headquarters had to be evaluated. Was this real? Was that real? Was the invasion occurring here, there, or somewhere else entirely? The Ruperts helped ensure that nobody knew the answers to those questions. One of the recurring themes of D-Day is that confusion tended to favor the Allies. The invasion plan depended upon German commanders making decisions slowly and reacting cautiously. Every hour of hesitation benefited the men coming ashore on the beaches. And so, while thousands of brave soldiers fought and died in Normandy, a collection of stuffed dummies quietly performed one of the most successful deception missions of the entire war, which is not bad for an army made out of burlap. Number 2, the Pathfinders who got lost. The first Allied troops to land in Normandy were not the famous airborne divisions. They were the Pathfinders. Their job was extraordinarily important. Before the main airborne assault arrived, small teams of specially trained paratroopers would jump into France, locate designated drop zones, and set up radio beacons and visual markers. The incoming transport aircraft would then use those signals to guide thousands of paratroopers toward their intended landing areas. In theory, it was an elegant system. In practice, Normandy was covered by darkness, low clouds, anti-aircraft fire, and pilots who were navigating under extraordinarily difficult conditions. The result, needless to say, was chaos. Many Pathfinder teams landed very far from where they were supposed to be. Some of them became lost almost immediately. Others found themselves isolated in enemy territory with only a vague idea of their actual location. Equipment was scattered, radio gear was lost, men spent precious minutes simply trying to determine where they had landed. Yet here is the remarkable part. Most of them continued the mission anyway. Small groups improvised. Some established navigation aids in locations that were merely close enough to the intended drop zones. Others marked whatever suitable terrain they could find. Individual soldiers displayed extraordinary initiative under circumstances that would have paralyzed less capable men. Even so, many of the incoming transport aircraft missed their intended targets entirely. Paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions were scattered across enormous areas of Normandy. Some landed in flooded fields and drowned under the weight of their own equipment. Others touched down miles from their assigned objectives. Entire units became fragmented. By conventional military standards, the airborne operation appeared to be a disaster. And yet the scattering produced unexpected advantages. German commanders struggled to determine where the main airborne landings had really occurred. Small groups of American paratroopers appeared seemingly everywhere. Road junctions were seized, bridges were attacked, communications were disrupted. Rumors spread rapidly through German headquarters. The Germans often assumed they were facing far larger forces than the ones that actually existed. The historian Stephen Ambrose once described Normandy on the morning of June 6th as a battlefield where groups of soldiers from different units found each other in the dark and simply began fighting together. That wasn't how the operation was supposed to work, obviously, but somehow it did work. The story of the Pathfinders perfectly illustrates one of the central lessons of D-Day, and that is plans are important, but the ability to adapt when the plans fail is even more important yet. Number 3, the general who landed at the wrong beach. If you were casting this story in Hollywood, probably no one would believe it. The hero is a 56-year-old general with severe arthritis, a bad heart, a walking cane, and a very famous last name. His name was Theodore Roosevelt Jr. Yes, the son of the Theodore Roosevelt you're thinking of, the former president. And by 1944, Ted Roosevelt, as he was known to his friends, had spent most of his adult life trying to escape the shadow of his father's reputation. He had served in the First World War, built a successful business career, and then returned to uniform after Pearl Harbor, despite being considered somewhat old and somewhat infirm for active service. By the spring of 1944, Roosevelt was serving as Assistant Division Commander of the U.S. 4th Infantry Division, one of the formations assigned to land at Utah Beach. Most generals would have observed the assault from a command ship. Roosevelt insisted on going ashore with the first wave. His superiors objected. He was too old, too senior, too valuable. If anything happened to him, the political repercussions alone would be quite substantial. But Roosevelt persisted. He wanted to see the conditions for himself and to provide immediate leadership if things started going wrong. As it turned out, things did start going wrong almost immediately. Strong currents and navigational difficulties pushed many of the landing craft off course. The troops of the 4th Infantry Division came ashore roughly a mile south of their intended landing area. That may not sound like very much, but in the middle of an amphibious invasion, it was a very big damn deal. Entire plans had been built around specific stretches of coastline, naval bombardment schedules, troop movements, engineering operations, and inland objectives all depended upon units arriving where planners expected them to arrive. But now they were all somewhere else. Officers began trying to determine exactly what had happened. Roosevelt, he took a look around, assessed the situation, and then delivered one of the great understatements in the history of military conflict. He said, "We'll start the war from right here." With that, he began reorganizing the landing. Rather than wasting precious time attempting to shift thousands of men back to the original plan, Roosevelt adapted the plan to reality. He redirected units, coordinated movements, and helped maintain momentum during the critical early hours of the assault. His calmness proved contagious. Soldiers who might otherwise have been rattled by the navigational error saw a general standing in the surf under enemy fire, walking with a cane, and acting as though the entire situation were merely a minor inconvenience. The result was one of the most successful beach landings of D-Day. Utah Beach suffered far fewer casualties than the planners had feared. By the end of the day, American forces had pushed inland and linked up with airborne troops despite beginning the invasion at the completely wrong locations. For his actions on June 6th, Roosevelt would receive the Medal of Honor. Sadly, he would not live long enough to enjoy it. Just over a month later, after the Normandy campaign had been largely secured, he died of a heart attack in France. Eventually, he was buried at the Normandy American Cemetery. Not far away rests another son of Theodore Roosevelt, Ted's younger brother Quentin, who was killed in aerial combat during the First World War. Father and son had both sought glory in warfare, but on D-Day, it was the son who demonstrated one of the most important truths of military leadership. When everything goes wrong, the most valuable words in the world may simply be, "All right, fine, we'll work with what we have." Number 4, the Rangers who climbed the cliffs for guns that were not there. Among the most iconic images of D-Day were the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc. Rising roughly 100 feet above the English Channel between Utah and Omaha beaches, the position appeared to be one of the most dangerous locations on the entire invasion front. Intelligence reports indicated that the Germans had emplaced 655 millimeter artillery pieces there. These guns posed a serious threat. If they remained operational, they could potentially fire upon troops landing at both of the nearby beaches. Allied planners concluded that the battery had to be eliminated as quickly as possible. The assignment went to the 2nd Ranger Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel James Rudder. Their mission bordered on the absurd. They were to land beneath the cliffs, scale the vertical rock face under enemy fire using ropes and ladders, seize the position, and destroy the artillery. Seems simple enough, except for the part about climbing a cliff while people are shooting at you. The Rangers reached the base of Pointe du Hoc amid rough seas and navigational delays. Some of the landing craft arrived late. Much of the equipment was lost. Ropes became tangled. Enemy fire swept the approaches. Then the men began climbing. Using ropes launched by rockets, extension ladders borrowed from the London fire brigades, and sheer determination, the Rangers fought their way upward. German defenders hurled grenades and opened fire from above. The Rangers kept climbing. Within minutes, they had secured the crest of the cliff. And then they encountered a bit of a problem. The problem was the guns weren't there. The concrete emplacements existed. The fortifications existed. The position itself was exactly where Allied intelligence said it would be. But the artillery pieces had been moved. At this point, lesser troops might have declared victory and sat around waiting for further instructions. But the Rangers didn't do that. Small patrols pushed inland to locate the missing guns. Eventually, they found them, hidden among some hedgerows several hundred yards away. The weapons were intact and operational, although they were not currently manned. The Rangers destroyed them using thermite grenades. Only then did the mission truly begin. For the next 2 days, the battalion found itself largely isolated atop the cliffs. German counterattacks struck repeatedly, ammunition dwindled, casualties mounted, communications became sporadic. Of the roughly 225 Rangers who began the assault, fewer than 100 remained capable of fighting by the time their relief arrived, and yet they had held. The story of Pointe du Hoc is often remembered as a dramatic cliff-climbing operation, and it certainly was that. But the most important lesson comes afterward. The Rangers achieved their objective not because the intelligence was correct, but because they adapted when it was not. The plan had called for them to destroy artillery inside the battery, but reality required them to hunt down artillery that had apparently vanished. Once again, D-Day rewarded initiative more than it rewarded obedience. The men at Pointe du Hoc understood that distinction rather perfectly. Number 5, Bill Millen and the bagpipes of war. Most military organizations spend considerable effort teaching soldiers how not to attract the attention of the enemy. Bill Millen's job description was somewhat different. Millen was a Scottish piper serving with the British commandos under Simon Fraser, better known as Lord Lovat. On the morning of 6 June 1944, as Allied troops prepared to land in Normandy, Millen received instructions that were both clear and rather deeply alarming. He was to play the bagpipes, not after the battle, but during it. Now, this may strike you as a questionable tactical decision, and it struck Millen that way too. British Army regulations dating back from the First World War had largely discouraged pipers from performing in combat theaters. Experience had demonstrated that men carrying musical instruments tended to attract enemy fire with unfortunate consistency. Millen pointed this out to Lord Lovat, and the Lord's response has become rather legendary. The regulations, he informed the piper, those regulations apply to the British Army, but we, he explained, we are Scottish. This was not a particularly convincing legal argument, but it was difficult to debate with a brigadier carrying a rifle and leading his commandos into battle. And so Bill Millen played. He played his little heart out. As the commandos landed on Sword Beach and moved inland, the skirl of the pipes echoed across the battlefield. Millen marched through shell fire, machine gun fire, and general chaos while performing traditional Scottish tunes. Imagine being a German soldier on that particular morning. You've spent months preparing for an Allied invasion. You wake up to discover that the largest amphibious assault in history has begun. Warships are bombarding the coast relentlessly. Aircraft are screaming overhead. Thousands of enemy troops are pouring onto the shore. And through all of this comes a man in a kilt, casually walking around, playing the goddamn bagpipes. It must have seemed really quite surreal. And remarkably, Millen survived. Years later, German veterans reportedly told him they had seen him during the battle, but they deliberately refrained from shooting, not because they admired him, not because they feared him, but rather because they assumed he was freaking insane. And there is a certain logic to this. If someone is strolling through an active battlefield playing the bagpipes, one might naturally conclude that the normal rules no longer apply. Millen accompanied Lord Lovat's commandos as they advanced toward Pegasus Bridge, one of the key objectives of the British airborne operation. There, in one of the most remarkable moments of D-Day, the commandos linked up with the airborne troops who had captured the bridge during the night. Throughout it all, the piper kept on piping. Military historians sometimes struggle to explain courage because courage is difficult to quantify. We can measure the range of artillery, we can count casualties, we can calculate logistics, but how do you measure a man who voluntarily walks through machine gun fire carrying nothing but a set of bagpipes? Perhaps you don't. Perhaps you simply acknowledge that every great military operation contains individuals who behave in ways that defy ordinary explanation. And Operation Overlord had many such heroes. Only one of them went into battle carrying sheet music. Number 6, Jimmy Doohan's longest day. For millions of people, James Doohan will always be Scotty from Star Trek, the miracle working engineer, the man who could coax another 20% out of the engines while informing Captain Kirk that doing so would almost certainly destroy the ship. But long before he became a television icon, Doohan was a young Canadian officer who landed in Normandy on D-Day at Juno Beach, and he very nearly died there. At the time, Doohan was a lieutenant in the Royal Canadian Artillery attached to the 14th Field Regiment. On the 6th of June, he came ashore with Canadian forces as part of the Allied assault on the Normandy coast. The Canadians had been assigned one of the more difficult sectors of the invasion. Like the Americans at Omaha and the British at Sword, they faced mines, obstacles, machine gun positions, artillery fire, and all of the general unpleasantness that accompanies amphibious assaults. The fighting was extremely fierce. Doohan later recalled that his unit came under heavy enemy fire as it moved inland. At one point, he personally shot 2 German snipers who had pinned down the Canadian troops. So far, so heroic. But then came the truly dangerous part, and that was nightfall. Military history is full of examples demonstrating that darkness is often more frightening than combat itself. Men become exhausted, communications deteriorate, rumors spread, every shadow looks suspicious. On the night of June 6th, Doohan was returning from a reconnaissance mission when a nervous Canadian sentry challenged him. And what happened next took only a matter of seconds. The sentry opened fire. Several rounds struck Jimmy Doohan. One of them hit his leg, another hit his hand, and one severed his right middle finger entirely. A fourth bullet struck him in the chest, and that last wound really should have ended his life. Fortunately for Doohan, he happened to be carrying a cigarette case in his breast pocket that he had been gifted by his brother. The bullet hit the metal case first, dramatically reducing its energy and preventing what would likely have been a fatal wound. Thus, one of the future stars of science fiction was saved by a pack of cigarettes. Doctors later removed the remains of the damaged finger, and throughout his acting career, Doohan generally concealed the missing digit from audiences by carefully positioning his right hand during filming. Most Star Trek fans never noticed. Indeed, many didn't learn about the injury until decades later. What makes Doohan's story particularly appropriate for a discussion of D-Day is that it perfectly illustrates the role of chance in warfare. Now think about the sequence of events here. He survived an amphibious assault. He survived lots of withering enemy fire. He survived the hazards of moving inland through occupied territory. And then he was nearly killed by a member of his own side. Military planners spend years preparing for major operations. They calculate tides and weather conditions and ammunition requirements, fuel consumption, and troop movements. What they cannot calculate is whether an exhausted sentry will mistake a friendly officer for a hostile enemy. The history of D-Day contains countless examples of courage, and it also contains countless examples of luck. James Doohan experienced both of those within a single day. Had events unfolded only slightly differently, Star Trek would have needed to find someone else to tell Captain Kirk that the engines can't take much more of this, Captain. Number 7, Pegasus Bridge and the most accurate landing of the war. Much of D-Day was characterized by total confusion. The capture of Pegasus Bridge, on the other hand, was characterized by the exact opposite. If the airborne drops demonstrated what happens when plans go sideways, Pegasus Bridge demonstrated what happens when everything goes exactly right. Shortly after midnight on the 6th of June, 6 British Horsa gliders crossed the Normandy coast carrying troops of the Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry under Major John Howard. Their objective was simple to describe and extraordinarily difficult to accomplish. They were to capture 2 bridges, one over the Caen Canal and another over the River Orne, before the Germans could manage to destroy them. These bridges were very strategically vital. If the Germans retained control of both, they could launch counterattacks against the eastern flank of the invasion beaches. If they destroyed them, Allied forces would face serious obstacles in moving troops and equipment inland. The bridges, therefore, had to be taken intact, not bombed, not shelled, but captured, and captured quickly. The chosen method was rather audacious. Instead of parachuting nearby and marching to the objective, the British would land their gliders almost directly on top of it. And keep in mind what that means. The pilots would be navigating at night over enemy territory without engines, aiming for a tiny landing zone bordered by trees, ditches, and German defenses. Missing by even a modest distance could doom the entire operation. By 12:16 a.m., the first glider had touched down. It came to rest approximately 50 yards away from the bridge. The second and third gliders landed moments later, and their precision was really quite astonishing. Some historians have described it as one of the greatest feats of military aviation that happened during the entire war. The troops immediately stormed the objective. The fighting itself was brief, but fierce and very violent. German defenders were caught largely by surprise. Within minutes, the bridge had been secured. One of the first British soldiers killed on D-Day, Lieutenant Den Brotheridge, fell during that assault, but the operation had succeeded. The bridge remained intact. For several tense hours afterward, Howard's men held the position against the possibility of a German counterattack. Then, later that morning, they heard a peculiar sound approaching from the direction of the coast. It was the sound of bagpipes. Lord Lovett's commandos had arrived. Marching toward the bridge was Bill Millen, still blowing away on those bagpipes. The link-up became one of the most celebrated moments of D-Day. For the airborne troops who had spent the night wondering whether relief would arrive, it was a very welcome sight indeed, or perhaps one might say, a welcome sound. Pegasus Bridge serves as a useful counterpoint to many other stories from D-Day. Elsewhere, the plans unraveled, but here, the plan worked almost to perfection. But even then, success depended upon extraordinary courage, skill, and initiative from a relatively small number of men. The largest invasion in history often hinged on groups small enough to fit inside a handful of wooden gliders. Number 8, the tanks that disappeared into the sea. And one of the most heartbreaking stories of D-Day involves a weapon that was supposed to save lives. Instead, it vanished beneath the waves. In preparation for the Normandy invasion, Allied planners developed a remarkable collection of specialized armored vehicles intended to solve specific battlefield problems. Among them was the duplex drive Sherman tank, usually called the Double D. The concept was ingenious. A waterproof canvas screen could be raised around the tank's hull, allowing it to float. Propellers powered by the tank's engines would then propel it through the water and toward the shore. In theory, infantry would receive armored support almost immediately after making their landing. The tanks, they would simply swim ashore. The British tested them with great success, and under suitable conditions, the vehicles performed surprisingly well. Unfortunately, Normandy on June 6th was not operating under suitable conditions, particularly at Omaha Beach. The sea was rougher than the planners had anticipated. Waves battered the landing craft carrying the tanks. Nonetheless, commanders proceeded with plans to launch many of the DD tanks well away from the shore, and the results were catastrophic. As the tanks entered the water, the rough seas overwhelmed them. Waves poured in over the canvas screens. Vehicles began taking on water. One after another, they sank to the bottom of the channel. Crews found themselves trapped inside rapidly flooding armored vehicles. Some of them escaped. Most did not. Of the 29 DD tanks launched by one battalion off Omaha Beach, only 2 of them successfully reached the shore under their own power. I say again, 2 of them. And the consequences were immediate. American infantry landing at Omaha had expected armored support. Instead, many came ashore facing German strongpoints with far fewer tanks than had been planned. To be clear, the sinking tanks did not cause the difficulty at Omaha Beach by themselves. Numerous factors contributed to the bloodshed that took place there, but they certainly did not help. It's impossible to know exactly how many lives might have been saved had more of the tanks survived the journey. What we do know is that many soldiers found themselves confronting German defenses without equipment that they had been depending on. The story is particularly poignant because the Double D tank was not a foolish idea at all. It was actually a quite clever one. In other sectors of the invasion where conditions were more favorable and launch distances shorter, the Double D tanks performed reasonably well. The concept worked. The sea simply had other plans on this day in this particular location. D-Day is often remembered as a contest between Allied and German forces. Sometimes, however, the most formidable opponent was nature itself. No German commander sank those tanks. The English Channel did. Number 9, the people who were being liberated. And we should always spare a thought for them, I think. When Americans think about D-Day, we naturally focus on the Allied soldiers, as well we should. The young men climbing down cargo nets into the landing craft, the paratroopers jumping into darkness, the Rangers scaling the cliffs, the infantry crossing beaches under heavy machine gun fire. And it is rightly so that we focus on those things, but there is another group of people whose experience of June 6th is often overlooked, and that is the French civilians. For them, D-Day was not something they watched, it was something that happened to them. By June of 1944, much of France had endured 4 years of German occupation. Food was scarce, freedom was even scarcer, the future was uncertain. Most French civilians desperately wished for liberation. But liberation arrived accompanied by one of the largest military operations in human history. The Allies could not invade Normandy without first attacking transportation networks, rail yards, bridges, roads, communication centers, and military positions throughout northern France. Heavy bombing campaigns were intended to isolate the battlefield and prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. From a military standpoint, the logic was perfectly sound. From the standpoint of the people living underneath those bombs, matters looked rather different. Entire neighborhoods wound up being destroyed. Towns suffered devastating damage. Families who had already endured years of occupation suddenly found themselves caught between two enormous military forces. The city of Caen provides perhaps the most striking example. Allied planners had hoped to capture it on D-Day itself. Instead, it became the focal point of weeks of very intense fighting. Bombardment and urban combat caused extensive destruction while civilians sheltered in basements, churches, and improvised refuges. For many Normans, June 6th was terrifying. Imagine waking in the middle of the night to the sound of aircraft engines, then explosions, then artillery, then warships firing from offshore, then thousands of soldiers moving through your neighborhood. You know liberation may be finally at hand at long last. You also know your home may not survive the end of the day. This is not, obviously, an argument against D-Day. The Allied invasion was necessary. Nazi Germany was one of the most destructive regimes in human history. Liberation could not occur without military action. But necessity and tragedy are not mutually exclusive. One of the peculiar features of war is that people can be rescued and endangered simultaneously. The civilians of Normandy experienced exactly that. By the end of the campaign, thousands of French civilians had been killed and many more wounded. Entire communities had been transformed beyond recognition. Yet, when Allied troops finally secured the region, celebrations erupted. The Germans were gone. Freedom had returned. The cost had been a terrible one, but the occupation finally had ended. The story of Normandy's civilians reminds us that military history often focuses on armies while overlooking the people who happen to live where the armies decide to do their fighting. For them, D-Day was not a chapter in a history book. It was the day when their world exploded. Number 10, the field marshal who wasn't there. Now, if you were writing a novel about D-Day, an editor would probably tell you to make this part a little bit less convenient. One of Germany's most capable field commanders and tacticians was not at his headquarters when the invasion began. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had gone home. Now, to be fair, he wasn't taking a vacation. Rommel commanded German Army Group B, which was responsible for defending pretty much most of northern France. He had spent months warning German leaders that the coming Allied invasion was going to be decided within the first few hours. Once the Allies established a foothold ashore, he argued, Germany's chances of throwing them back into the sea were going to diminish dramatically. In retrospect, he was, of course, absolutely correct. Unfortunately for the Germans, the system under which he operated was not designed for rapid decision-making. On the 5th of June, weather forecasts suggested that conditions were too poor to launch an invasion. Many senior German officers concluded that no major operation was imminent. Rommel decided to travel to Germany, partly to visit his wife on her birthday and partly to discuss military matters with senior leadership. But then the weather changed. The Allies had identified a little tiny brief window of opportunity, and overnight, Operation Overlord had well and truly begun. As reports started arriving, German commanders faced a fundamental problem. Was this really the invasion? Or was it yet another in a series of deceptions? Remember, the Allies had spent months convincing Germany that the main invasion was going to occur in the Pas de Calais. Even after troops landed in Normandy, some German leaders remained highly suspicious. Perhaps this was merely another diversion. Perhaps the real attack was still going to come elsewhere. This uncertainty showed decision-making at precisely the moment when speed mattered the most. Compounding matters further was Adolf Hitler's command structure. Certain armored reserves could not be moved under any circumstances without Hitler's personal authorization. During the crucial early hours of June 6th, Hitler was asleep. His subordinates were reluctant to wake him. This sounds absurd because it was absurd. Yet dictatorships often create exactly this kind of paralysis. Everyone fears making the wrong decision, so nobody makes any decision. Many hours passed. Requests moved up and down the chain of command. Arguments occurred. Clarifications were sought. Meanwhile, Allied troops continued pouring onto the shore. To be clear, D-Day did not succeed simply because Rommel happened to be away from his headquarters. The invasion succeeded because hundreds of thousands of Allied personnel executed an extraordinarily difficult operation under very dangerous conditions. But the German response illustrates one of the recurring lessons of history. Competent organizations can function when leaders are absent, but rigid organizations struggle even when the leaders are present. As the day progressed, German commanders gradually realized the scale of what was actually happening. By then, however, the Allies had established themselves in Normandy. The opportunity Rommel had feared losing was now gone. For all the drama of D-Day, one of its decisive battles was fought not on a beach, but inside headquarters, where officers struggled to determine what was happening and who was authorized to respond to it. History often celebrates bold action, but it should occasionally remember the consequences of hesitation as well. Now, if you've noticed a pattern in these stories, that's probably not an accident. A great many things went wrong on D-Day. The fake paratroopers were supposed to create confusion. The real paratroopers actually got confused. Pathfinders landed in the completely wrong places. Theodore Roosevelt Jr., he also landed in the wrong place. The Rangers climbed a cliff to destroy guns that wound up not even being there. The Germans struggled to determine whether the invasion was real. The Canadians accidentally shot one of their own officers, and he wasn't the only one. The sea swallowed tanks that were supposed to support the infantry. Even the man playing the bagpipes through a combat zone was technically acting in violation of regulations. This is not usually how we imagine history's greatest military operations unfolding. We prefer stories in which brilliant plans are executed flawlessly by disciplined professionals. Reality tends to be a bit more untidy than all that. The truth about Operation Overlord is not that everything worked. The truth is that just enough things worked. And when they didn't work, somebody made the necessary adjustment. A pathfinder improvised. A junior officer took the initiative. A pilot landed exactly where he needed to. A commander made a decision without awaiting instructions. A group of soldiers continued the mission after discovering that the original plan no longer applied. Military historians often debate which factor was most important on D-Day. Was it logistics, air power, naval power, intelligence, industrial capacity, or something else? The answer, of course, is yes. All of those things mattered. They mattered a great deal. But behind every statistic stood human beings making decisions under conditions of great uncertainty. What ultimately carried the day was not perfection, it was resilience. The ability of thousands of ordinary people to continue functioning when circumstances departed rather dramatically from the script. Perhaps that is why D-Day remains so compelling more than 8 decades on. Not because it demonstrates how carefully human beings can plan, but because it demonstrates how much they can accomplish after those plans begin falling apart. The beaches of Normandy have become, quite rightly, symbols of victory. They should also be remembered as monuments to adaptability. The largest amphibious invasion in history succeeded not because it was flawless, but because an extraordinary number of people refused to let its flaws become fatal. And that may be the most impressive achievement of them all. Here ends Curmudgeon's Field Guide to D-Day. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, ever so much for your kind attention. And I now transmit you into the custody of my distinguished colleague, your illustrious co-host, the one and only, your friend and mine, Mr. Caucasian Sasquatch.
Tactical nuke incoming!
You get your ass on the beach, and I'll be there. And I'll tell you what to do. There ain't anything in this plan that's going to go right. Colonel Paul R. Good, addressing the 175th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, moments before the launch of D-Day. Wow. What a unit. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
That's us playing the intro halfway through the show. Sorry.
It happens, bro. There's nothing wrong with it. I was just thinking, for the middle of the show, that's a little bit long. we're gonna have to trim that up a little. We'll play it at the end. I told you
the monologue got away from me. It happens sometimes.
You're good, bro. You're good.
You know what
actually
happens
like that a lot.
when I start writing about World War II. Sometimes it happens.
Sure. But actually, I want to let me do the thing. I'm doing the thing. Hold on.
Sorry.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Blast Radius. Tonight, we're largely going to be covering various stories of D-Day and its immediate aftermath. Primarily because, damn it, there's just so much interesting crap that went on there. The dead guy who convinced them they were going to freaking land at Calais. Wasn't he like a prisoner or some crap? Some poor bastard that died in a cell somewhere. I can't remember. The body. The English officer that wasn't.
Yeah, well, shit. I always forget that guy's name. I remember the name of his fake identity. That was William Miller, I believe.
Yeah, William Miller. Bill Miller. Yeah.
Now I need to look up Operation Mincemeat so I can remember the names.
I can't ever remember the name of the operation, and that gets me every time. But I want you to stop and think. I want you to put yourself in this young German private's position. You're laying there. It's 2:00 in the morning, and some asshole with an SS death's head on his freaking chest kicks open the fucking door and starts screaming, "They're coming! They're coming!" It's an invasion. You wake up. There's freaking airplanes screaming overhead, and you go outside. You suit up. You grab your gear. You run out, and it's 3:00 in the morning. Then it's 4:00 in the morning, and bombardments are happening, and everybody's like manning their post in the wall, and freaking airplanes keep coming and going, and motherfuckers are falling out of the goddamn sky, and then the fog rolls in the dawn. Crack of light, you know they're landing on the beach, and then you hear the craziest bastard ever playing the bagpipes and having a nice stroll on the beach.
Yep.
Why duck? If you're gonna be playing bagpipes, there's no point in dodging, ducking, nothing. There's nothing you could do.
The very last time bagpipes appeared on the battlefield was that day.
Wait.
And I think Lord Lovett got in a bit of trouble with his superiors over that, but it all worked out in the end, didn't it?
Sure. But I want you to think of that guy who's peeping over the edge of the sandbags, looking down the beach, and the people have just come ashore. They're too far away for your Mauser, so your KAR won't quite handle it. So you're going to wait till they get part of the way up the beach, but you hear the fucking bagpipes playing in the distance, and you see this one crazy bastard in a kilt, a fucking pom-pom on his goddamn head, and he's just wandering up to your goddamn location. Casually, even.
People who are only familiar with, modern day 20th century warfare and onward often don't understand how important music used to be on the battlefield. It used to be
all about timing.
Absolutely crucially important. And for the Scots, obviously, back when Scotland and England weren't the same thing, they didn't have a band, traditional band like the English would have had, like most European armies had. They just had pipers, and your piper told you everything. He told you where your unit was, where your flag was, what you were supposed to do next. It's just like bugle calls, as we're familiar with from our watching stories about the cavalry and the Indian Wars and everything. The bugle and the band were how you gave instructions to your men over the din of combat. And and rather than being just some weird thing they decided to do it was actually the death rattle of that whole tradition that had gone on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And in that sense, even though it didn't really have any utilitarian purpose on the battlefield that day, anybody who was around, who was actually in those units, they're going to say, yeah, you're damn right. I was braver seeing what that bagpipe guy was doing. Yeah.
Right.
Because I had a gun and he didn't. And look at what he's doing. Look how fearless he is. If he can be that fearless, I can be fearless too.
Exactly. And this actually goes across several different branches of military service in that aspect. Chaplains who wandered across the beach giving dying soldiers the last rites without ever ducking their head. Corpsmen who wandered around treating those very same injuries as they were occurring. You see a little bit of it in some of the old war films, but I really seriously doubt that gives us a true flavor of what it was like. One of the best quotes I ever heard come out of Omaha specifically was Omaha Beach. He was part of the second wave, and he came in. This was one of the Higgins boats that on the second wave, this was their second full trip. The front door had sprung a leak. And so as it's coming ashore, it's literally taking on water. And so the driver gives the order to bug out. He basically orders everybody to dip 5 loads of water out of the Higgins boat and then go over the side, because I'm not opening the door and I'm not staying here. And so as he's pulling up, the front of the boat drags the ground. Everybody bails a handful of water and it floats, and then they jump out and he bugs the bunk out. The guy jumps out, catches one of those goddamn big ass I-beams that were set up to stop the tanks, cracks him right upside the head, sinks like a fucking stone because he's got a BAR and 50 pounds of rations strapped to his left testicle.
Right.
Hits the bottom, pulls out his bayonet and starts trying to cut at the webbing to get the thing off of his leg. Right. And he gets it cut loose. And it doesn't let go of the bag that he's trying to get loose. It lets go of another soldier that had landed on top of him, and he had gotten tangled in it and just grabbed the wrong web. Luckily, as soon as he cuts that loose, he shoots straight to the top, catches hold of the thing that just slapped him in the head. He's all cross-eyed, can't tell what's going on, has no idea what happens. And at that moment, he realizes that if hell exists on earth, this is surely where it's at right now.
And a really horrifying number of men never even made it onto dry ground that day. They drowned under the weight of their own equipment.
Right.
You know, hundreds and hundreds of them did. Not just the ones in the tanks, but the ones whose Higgins boat didn't make it all the way to shore. And I'm glad you brought up the Higgins boats and the landing craft, because we oftentimes don't think of the men who were manning those vehicles, because they were exposed. You kind of have to expose yourself to enemy fire in order to drive that thing where you're wanting it to go. And they didn't just have to do that once. They had to go back over and over and over and over again. You know, the infantrymen only had to do it one time. The guy driving the Higgins boat, maybe dozen times, and a dozen more times the next day. And they often do not get enough credit for their heroism.
That's true. Let's get back to the bagpiper and check this out.
Have you heard of the Mad Piper of D-Day? Bill Millen, a Scottish soldier, stormed the beaches of Normandy, armed not with a rifle, but with bagpipes. Defying orders to avoid drawing attention, he played traditional Scottish tunes amidst the chaos. Amazingly, German snipers admitted later they spared him, thinking he'd gone mad. His bravery became legendary.
Teddy Roosevelt.
So, yeah, dude, if I see your monkey ass wandering across a nice beach walk, you know, it would have been interesting for him and Theodore Jr. to have wandered down the same beach, right? Just to see some old codger and some bagpipe pass each other on the way by. But they were going up the beach.
You know what's interesting about the Ted Roosevelt story is that he and his father I think they're one of only 2 father and son recipients of the Medal of Honor. But you know what sets them apart is they both died not knowing they had won the award.
Right? That's kind of fucked up.
President Theodore Roosevelt didn't get the Medal of Honor until I think he didn't get it until the 90s, because Congress decided he should get it for his heroism at San Juan Hill.
Yeah.
And Ted Roosevelt, it was a month after his death that they said, yeah, that guy really did some badass stuff on that day, and he probably deserves the award too. So yeah, father and son Medal of Honor winners both didn't know they won it.
His quote encapsulate what won the war, because that exact circumstance replayed itself over 10 million times that morning. I had like 250,000 freaking airborne troops ended up in the wrong places. Nobody was where they were supposed to be, but because there had been just enough cross training of different plans, they knew just enough of what their neighbors were supposed to be doing that they were like, all right, if we're not here, then we've got to be somewhere over here. And if that's the case, then somebody has to go take this hard point. Somebody's got to go take out those guns, and somebody's got to take this crossroads. And there's a bridge over here that's going to need some support. And these 5 guys that landed in the same ditch look at each other and go, okay, Cap, you're the highest ranking person here. Which one do we do first? His quote encapsulates the whole victory.
Yeah, because we can sit around and cry that things aren't going to plan, or we can play the board that is before us. And so we will start the war from right here. And that's, it's one of the greatest quotes in all of warfare, I think.
True. Absolutely true. I think "Ain't That a Bitch" is another one.
Yeah.
Right?
Also
and
nuts.
That was also nuts. One of my favorites of all times.
Shout out to General McAuliffe.
I want to know how many people that he had carried his balls around for that shit, because dude was literally surrounded by the Third Reich, had the only defensible position in 50 fucking miles on this road, and the one position that the Germans absolutely had to take to make any progress back towards Calais. And they surround him, outnumbered 800 to 1. They send in a guy and they're like, hey, you can leave here and save face. Just surrender. We'll treat your men real good. We got some great little camps over here. We'll keep you into the end of the war. We're going to push y'all right back into the sea.
Oh yeah, and they wrote a very polite, letter demanding surrender. They said, "You men have fought really very valiantly. We admire you very much, but how about let's stop this needless effusion of blood? We all know who's going to win here, and it's not you, it's us. So let's stop beating around the bush. Let's all go have a drink together and celebrate our heroism." And he writes back, "Nuts."
and can you imagine the German high command sitting there, and they get this message? And they look at each other. They're like, there's probably 3 people in that room that were American. No. There's at least one guy in there that went to an American finishing school. You know this, man. Over a quarter of the German officers spoke English. I mean, half of them were educated in America. Some of them went to West Point. I mean, just wow. And nuts. And the German guys the true German guys look around at each other like, what the fuck's that supposed to mean? And the one that was trained in America goes, that's not good. Not good.
And the way it actually came about was he was just, when he said the word nuts, when he said it the first time, he wasn't actually intending for that to be his written response to the demand for surrender. He was mostly just expressing his own exasperation. He was saying, he was saying, well, shit, what am I going to do? And then his executive officer decided, why not just go with the first thing you said? I think it works as well as anything else. We both know we're not going to surrender, so just let me write fucking nuts on the page and we'll send it back to him. It'll be great.
I mean,
that's what they did.
And this is what I call trolling under pressure. I don't know who passed that one, but that was an absolute genius move, because it delayed them from attacking because they argued over what the meaning was, right?
Yeah,
it's one of the guys thought it was a request, that he wanted nuts there when they surrendered. So one guy was like, "Yes, go get this guy some fucking nuts." So they're like, "What are you talking about?" Like, go get he wants nuts. Go get him some fucking nuts, man. They'll give up the position. I don't think that's what that means.
The unwritten part of the sentence is, this guy has gigantic nuts.
Nuts. Absolutely.
I need a couple men to help me carry around my nuts. But back to the paratroopers for a moment, which you were correct to mention, and I want to just give them another brief shout out, because I think most people don't understand how shambolic that part of the operation was when the 82nd and the 101st dropped in on the night before. Some of them in gliders, some of them dropped from regular old aircraft. but the landings went so very badly that I'm not sure if a single unit actually remained intact on the ground. Many of the units that actually wound up completing those objectives contained men from the 82nd and the 101st. Some of them didn't even have any officers present because all of the officers had been killed. But you know what? They did what Ted Roosevelt did. They played the board that was before them, and they worked with what they had, and they got the fucking job done. And God bless them for it.
I read a collection of letters home from soldiers in high school, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was like from Germany with love or something like that, from Swaziland. I don't remember. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of different stories. Some of them wilder than others, and one of my favorites was about this dude. He jumps on Normandy behind. Was supposed to land somewhere outside of Calais. He ends up over by some fucking board town. He doesn't even recognize it. It was so far away from his drop zone that he'd never heard of the town. But there was this one private who apparently grew up in the area. He's like, no, I know exactly where we're at. We need to go over here, take this place out, then we need to go do this. But he's a captain. He's supposed to take command of this situation. And he's so far off the board, none of his equipment, none of his maps or anything are accurate. And he's got this one private who's like, nah, man, I got this. So he immediately promotes the guy over everyone else that's there. And it's like, listen, this guy's an old country boy from here. Whatever he says goes. I don't even speak French. And from there, they end up executing 5 almost flawless hits on a bridge point, which the crossroad was last, a bridge point, 2 guns, a machine gun nest, all of which they took from behind by surprise, by the book, exactly as would be scheduled out, flawlessly. No losses until they took the crossroads. And it wasn't taking the crossroads that they experienced losses, it was holding it. Because as they were holding it, Germans are trying to go places and do stuff, and they just keep wandering the fuck up. And so they've run out of their ammo and are now using captured German weapons to try to hold this hard point. And by the way, they weren't expecting to be holding this crossroad at all. So when they took it, they took out the MG32 that was covering it for the Germans. So suddenly they're there, and all they've got is a bunch of like MP38s. And so they come up with this plan. They slam every single MP38 they've got full of freaking ammo, load up every magazine they can find, stack them up on top of all the stuff around, and then all 7 of them run from location to location in the crossroad, just basically randomly spraying fire, while the 2 injured guys are laying on the ground loading more magazines as fast as they can.
It's a thing we today call an improvised explosive device.
Right.
Yeah. They're go ahead.
You have I was going to ask you if you had something you wanted to throw in there.
Well, I was going to mention something about the maps, because I think a lot of people lose sight, though it has to be borne in mind. This is 1944. There is no Google Maps where you can go to grab an up-to-date street grid of these places you're going. The maps they were working with were mostly 1930s road atlases that were the most recent they could get, because it's not like you can go into Occupied France and get yourself a road atlas. You've got a certain amount of aerial reconnaissance, but not that much and not that great, because if you're flying over occupied country, so obviously you're going to get shot at. That limits the quality of photographs that you're able to get. So many of their objectives that they were designed to take didn't look very much like the 10-year-old maps that they had been given that were the best thing they had to work with. And that just added to the potential shambolicness. It was another potential single point of failure that could have made the entire thing go sideways, but they overcame it just like they overcame every damn other thing. They formed ad hoc units with different people from different divisions, sometimes no officers. They just went and got shit done. It's time to go
We'll start the war from here.
We will start the war from here. It is time to get shit done. We'll work with what we have
done.
from where we are. Get her done. There's a reason why Americans say that, goddammit.
It's true. All right, so I'm going to transition a little bit to a different story. The Pegasus Bridge, folks. Now, I want you to imagine the horror stories you've experienced in the military up to this point. They got your food wrong. They got your bunk wrong. They got your sex wrong. They got your haircut wrong. They've got your training wrong. They've got you on the wrong beach, in the wrong boat, with the wrong people, at the wrong place, at the wrong time. Nothing has gone right. Pegasus Bridge crew lands. They come out. They have no idea how horribly the rest of the war is going. They run up, take their position, move, take the next position, lock down. Nothing happens. Now, I don't know about you, but that's about the time I start getting the heebie-jeebies in the word, bro. Like, everything has executed flawlessly. What, are they going to drop a nuke on us in a second? Like, what's going on?
And that's another element of uncertainty that you're introducing into the equation, because if you're a unit and you're supposed to link up with another unit, you have no idea if that unit you're supposed to link up with even exists still, or if it does exist, what its operational effectiveness is, what their losses might be, if they're ever going to arrive at all. So what do? Do you wait for the link up, or do you assume the link up isn't coming? Because it's not like you have very good radio communication here, because let's be honest.
In this case,
almost none of the answers you need, you have access to in terms of planning what you're going to do next tactically.
In this case, their orders were to take the bridge, hold it at all costs. There is no help coming. If you lose that bridge, the bridge is the help that's coming. So don't lose it, because they won't turn right there if there's no bridge there. So if that bridge goes, you're walking home through enemy occupied France. Good luck. Their point was to hold the bridge. So the only way they get help is if they do it. And so they did. But it was, like I said, went off without a hitch. And every single one of those guys were freaking the frick out. Right?
Absolutely. And as I mentioned in the monologue, the piloting skill of the guys who flew those gliders and landed them basically on a postage stamp at night, right next to the bridge they were supposed to take, the skill of those men absolutely cannot be overstated, because that's about as badass as it gets. Those gliders, bear in mind, they are made of wood. You've got no engine. You've got no lights on the goddamn thing. You are placing yourself in God's hands when you even fly a glider at night in the first place, much less a glider with 20 guys in the back that you have to land on a certain individual spot.
Yeah. I know a pilot who says that mission never happened. That's bullshit. That there's no way that many things went right in the military. It is impossible. That is propaganda. Don't believe it. And I'm like, I don't know, dude. If you throw enough spaghetti at a wall, eventually something's going to stick. And that's kind of what D-Day was. Right?
Yeah. And really the Pegasus Bridge operation was the one thing in the whole Operation Overlord that went absolutely flawlessly, just the way they drew it up. Everything else, not so much.
And I bet you, if you went to the guys that were there and did it, and you got them a little bit drunk and hit them with some pentothal, they might tell a little bit of a different story of it not going quite so flawlessly, and that there were problems, but they overcame them and decided just not to mention them later. But it was probably stuff like, my whistle didn't work, his flashlight was broken, that guy didn't have the right ammo. I had a bunch of potatoes instead of MREs. I don't know how that happened.
Oh, and I wanted to mention also, are you done talking about the current thing? Can I shift a little bit?
Go ahead. Transition.
Okay. I wanted to mention also that I have to hold up my hand and say, yes, I am one of the people who never realized for many years that Jimmy Doohan was missing his right middle finger. But, and I don't even remember where I read it, but once you know about it
on D-Day
and start looking for it, you can never unsee it, because you're always looking for that missing finger. Every time you watch Star Trek, it's like a curse.
Yep. So since you transitioned that way, let's do the thing, because I went and found a thing.
Nice.
And probably says exactly the same thing you just said.
Doohan on D-Day. Famed Star Trek actor James Doohan, aka Scotty, was shot 6 times during World War II. How did this happen? After leading his men through a minefield on Juno Beach and personally taking out 2 German snipers in the process, Doohan took 4 rounds in one of his legs, 1 in his hand, which ultimately resulted in him losing his middle finger, and 1 in his chest. The shot to the chest likely would have been fatal, except that he had a silver cigarette case there that deflected the bullet. He would later give up smoking, but at least he could say that being a smoker actually saved his life. Funny enough, the shots he took were not fired by the enemy, but rather by an overzealous Canadian gunman. After Doohan's unit was secured in their position for the night, he was crossing between command posts when a Canadian gunman spotted him and opened fire. Doohan originally joined the Canadian Forces at the age of 19, eventually being commissioned a lieutenant in the Royal Canadian Artillery. D-Day was the first and last action that he saw in the war. After recovering from his injuries, he became a pilot in the Canadian Air Force, but never flew in combat. Despite this, he was once called the craziest pilot in the Canadian Air Force when he flew a plane through 2 telegraph poles after slaloming down a mountainside just to prove it could be done.
And he wasn't even in the Air Force.
I mean, he had enough power this time.
he was an Army guy joyriding in an Air Force plane and just wanted to prove that all the actual Air Force pilots were pussies. Watch, I'll fly between those 2 phone poles. My balls are bigger than yours. And that's a pretty badass story.
What he did was he looked at that guy and he says, "Hey, how many times have you been shot? Give me the stick."
Yeah, exactly. And that, I think I mentioned to you backstage before the show that Doohan friendly fire nighttime story reminds me, obviously, of Stonewall Jackson at Chancellorsville, because that's the exact same manner in which he met his death. He was reconnoitering the battlefield with his staff and was coming back, and some jittery sentry just opened up on him, and there goes your commanding general. Good job, idiot.
Congratulations. You won the war for the North. So proud of you.
And I don't mean to intimate that there's any chance the ultimate outcome of the war would have been differently, but certainly in the short-term strategic situation, obviously it was a major loss for the Confederates. And it's kind of a fun counterfactual to imagine that Charlottesville that Chancellorsville incident not happening and Jackson being present at Gettysburg. What does Gettysburg look like if General Thomas Jackson is present? Chew on that one.
Well, the second half would be different because the charge would have never taken place.
Yeah, you probably don't have a Pickett's charge because Jackson would have shut that shit down. He would have said, "What the fuck are you thinking, Pickett?" Yep.
It would have been a slow, drudging march across that fucking cornfield, dude. It would have been bloodiest shit you ever saw. Oh, God, that is nightmarish.
Yeah, I mean, Jackson's greatest strength as a tactician was audacious movement without suffering catastrophic loss.
Right.
He was probably the best general in the war as far as that aspect of generalship. And when he went down and was no longer around, and we're not talking about a Confederate army that has an unlimited supply of manpower. They certainly could not afford the effusion of blood that they wound up suffering at Gettysburg, which almost certainly would have been less severe if Jackson had still been around. I mean, that battle probably might look very, very different than the way history records it. It might be a fun thing to do. It might be a fun thing to do an entire counterfactual video about, as a matter of fact. I'm sure somebody already has, but it still sounds fun.
I say we go find somebody who's done it, and then we pick apart what we think about what they did. I like that. All right, let's transition a little bit further. Snorkel tanks and the funnies. So the Sherman tank was essentially the Swiss Army knife of motorized combat. What was the guy's name? Doolin? No. He had a weird name. The
Hobart?
funnies. All yeah, the
Hobart's
Hobart
funnies,
funnies. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So this guy invented a funny for ever possible. And when I say funny, it's an odd tank with odd capabilities. Some
I
of
know.
them had flamethrowers. Some of them were super armored. Some of them were floating, right? Some of them were mine destroying tanks. Some of them were road layers. There were bulldozer tanks and freaking snowplow tanks.
The Mine Destroyer is my favorite one of the Hobart's funnies because that is what a goddamn brilliant design that is. You just take a tank, put a scoop on the front of it, like you use for a front end loader, and then put a spool on it, spin the spool, put a bunch of chains on the damn thing, just drive it along the beach, and it blows up any mines that happen to be there. And the personnel inside the tank are perfectly fine, no danger whatsoever. And that's exactly the kind of out-of-the-box engineering thinking that wins wars. You want a guy like that on your side when the war starts, because he is going to come up with ideas that, he's not bound by the same traditional thinking that many of your other engineers are going to be bound by. He's going to come up with ideas that are going to be scoffed at and laughed at by a lot of his colleagues. But you know what? They're going to work. They're going to save a lot of lives. They're going to help you win the damn war. And every single one of Hobart's funnies materially contributed to the war being won. And he's really an unsung hero, in my opinion.
I agree. And I don't know how unsung he is. Everybody knows his name that checks at any extent into World War II.
It's true.
You can't go through much of it without coming across at least one of Hobart's funnies. Wasn't he also involved in the dam bomb? The
dam busters, yes, I believe so. Yes, yeah, the bouncing bomb.
That is one of the most genius applications of physics on Earth.
I know.
And as far as applying it to a war, Jesus, monkeys, and Joseph, listen. Here's the idea. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take 1,000-pound bomb. We're going to put it in the belly of a big ass airplane. We're going to put a 2-stroke engine in the belly of that airplane too. We're going to spool that fucker up to 1,000 RPMs and drop it from 900 feet at the river mouth of the lake. That bomb is going to bounce across the top of the lake, hit the dam, stops or slow down spinning just enough so that when it hits the water, it buries itself 30 foot deep, 50 foot deep, 100 foot deep, hits the bottom and fucking detonates under the dam as if you pulled a pin at the perfect location. And all of this is not done through timing. It's not done through anything except when this bomb stops spinning, it blows up.
Yeah. And
That's
also the invention of that, as I'm sure some of the people watching us are already aware of this, but the invention of that, water bouncing bomb that they wound up destroying that dam with, that was actually the second option they came up with, because the first option had resulted in the death of Joseph Kennedy Jr., Jack Kennedy's big brother, the guy who probably would have been president if he had survived the war instead of Jack Kennedy. But the original plan was to load up a B-17, with as much goddamn high explosive as you could pack into the thing, and you would lock it onto a collision course with the dam. The air crew, there would only be 2 air crew in there. They would parachute out of the thing, and then unmanned, it would crash into the dam and hopefully explode with enough force to destroy the damn thing. But unfortunately, on the day Kennedy was doing one of the test runs, the thing decided to blow up when he was still in it, when it wasn't planned to blow up. And so there went Joe Kennedy Jr. And then they opted to go instead with the bounce bomb thingy.
Which is genius and absolutely applicable to the circumstance. And
a much better
there's
idea
another
than
one.
The first one. Yeah.
Have you ever heard the phrase "send up the balloon"?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where that phrase derives from?
Tell me.
All right. So right after World War II, actually, it was kind of come up with during World War II. The physics of it was put together, but no airplanes existed to actually pull it off at the time. And so, and during the whole Cold War era between World War II in Korea, we had a bunch of spies over in red territory over there. And it was decided by the War Department to figure out a way to extricate spies from behind enemy lines with super secure, nobody ever know about it. And they came up with this idea. It was a briefcase that had a radio signal that would only go something like 20 miles or 10 miles or 2 miles or something like that. And the way this worked was, before they would leave wherever they were extricating themselves from, they would send out whatever signal they're supposed to send to say, look, I'm coming out. I need to be picked up. Pull out all the stops, jerk my ass out of here. I have really desperate information that needs to get to somebody who knows what the fuck to do with it. He would then carry his briefcase out to a location that was somewhat predetermined. There'd be a dozen of them in the area, and you'd go choose the safest one at that time. And then the only sign that you existed in that place was when you opened the briefcase, a red balloon would be in there. You would fill it full of helium, attach it to a wire, and float the balloon up. And you'd run it up 200, 300 feet. And that wire would carry a radio signal to an airplane that was flying in the area, specifically waiting to find that red balloon. And as soon as the balloon got up high enough for the airplane to catch hold to it, it would turn and focus in, because it had a radio on both ends of the wings, and it could tune in on exactly where that wire was at. It would then fly 12 feet above the red balloon so that the hook would catch the wire. When it hit the balloon, the wire would wrap around the hook really fast, and it would cinch as soon as it caught in the cleats that were built into not a hook, but a weird little L-shaped, like, that looked like a wheelbarrow hanging off the back of but it was specifically designed to tangle this fucking wire, not tie it, not connect it, but tangle it, literally just tangle it. And then the guy on the ground is wearing a really heavy duty safety suit that is Velcro strapped, 5-point harness with the whole lanyard and everything hooked up to it, and a big ass backpack. And the backpack didn't have a parachute in it. It didn't have none of that shit. It had 155 foot of fucking bounce cable, so that when that airplane snatched your ass off the ground at 215 miles an hour or whatever the hell they were going, it would stretch out enough that your mouth didn't fall out of your asshole on the way out. And it would go boing, 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 boing. And then they draw you in. They do a weird little turn so that they could reach back with a hook and catch it and start pulling you in.
And things like this, the types of inventions that we're talking about right now, are the exact reason why technological advancement is so much accelerated during times of war, because you find yourself confronted with engineering problems that wouldn't exist in any other non-war context, and you have to find a way to solve them. And oftentimes the method that you use for solving them winds up leading you down the path to a really cool thing, some invention that you wouldn't otherwise have had any reason to think of. And so both of the world wars were like that, as far as a 5-year period, and there's probably 25, 30 years of technological advancement that are stuffed into those 5 years, especially with airplanes during the First World War. The First World War starts, powered flight is a thing that barely even exists. By the end of the war, 5 years later, we've got 4-engine bombers already. We're already well down the path toward the way airplanes would look in the Second War, and then the Second War accelerates that even again.
Aerial reconnaissance in the First World War was an absolute game breaker.
Yes, absolutely, because generals had been wishing for thousands and thousands of years to be able to have a bird's eye view of the battlefield and to form their strategy and tactics accordingly. And I guess you could, there was a little bit of balloon reconnaissance in our Civil War and the Crimean War and various, other European wars in the second half of the 19th century, but it isn't until powered flight in the First World War where you really get to exploit that effectively. And when you're not sending guys up with big ass box cameras to photograph the battlefield. They're shooting pistols at each other. That's the way a dogfight looked in
I was fixing to
1914.
say.
It was two guys shooting pistols at each other.
An asshole that carries grenades with him and tosses them out as he's going over the lines.
Yeah.
Because what a dick.
Yeah. Aerial combat was completely improvised as they went along. And
It's a little funny. It's not funny at all. This is diabolical.
but it is kind of funny. But then it only takes what, 2 years after that before Hugo Vickers invents the interrupter gear that enables you to shoot a machine gun through your propeller blades. That obviously changes everything.
Two things happen.
2 years. That's 24 months. It takes us to get from shooting pistols to each other to fully modern air gunnery. And that's amazing.
From Amelia Earhart to Erich von Richthofen. Wait, did I get that wrong?
Manfred von Richthofen.
Who's Erich von Richthofen? Fuck. You're right. You're right. I knew that. I knew it was wrong when it came out of my mouth. It didn't taste right.
It did not taste right. Manfred does not taste like Erich.
Right? That's true. And something else to keep in mind as far as the D-Day invasion is concerned. This was a very strange war. I find difficulties finding anything related to an analogy to the Second World War. I don't know of any war where a military ensconced into combat on one continent that ended on another continent, right? Like, that's wild.
Well, it's really two wars that coalesce into one when you get right down to it.
But it's not. It is, but it's not. It's two wars for the Japanese and Germans. It's one war for the Americans, because as soon as Germany wraps up over there, a third of those people get shipped west, east, depending on how you look at it. And a lot of the know-how and experience of war fighting came directly from the unfortunate soldiers that were shipped into both fronts. But then what's weird is, even though there's a whole bunch of hardened men over there, wasn't it Bastogne that served on both fronts and got a Medal of Honor and almost got two? Because
no,
Basilone. Yes. Either side of that, he could have gotten the Medal of Honor, but they waited until he did something like really badass. Like, he'd already done some serious shit.
Yeah. And then he does everything he does and randomly just catches one in the head one day while he's on patrol and he's fucking dead.
And that is war.
And that is war. Yeah. You never know when your number is going to get called.
Which is why there's no, and this is something my pops told me. He served in Vietnam. And he told me, he said, son, if you ever end up on a battlefield, civilian or military, there is 0 point in worrying about whether you're going to live or die. You'll never find out. So your best bet is to accomplish the mission before they get a chance to kill you. You go in, you do the mission, do nothing else.
Because you're going to be the last one to know you got killed anyway.
Yeah, you might not ever find out that you died. Yeah. And he told a very maudlin story about a couple of buddies of his that, or I say buddies, they were in like the same division, but not the same group. And apparently they were fucking around with hand grenades.
Oh dear.
Yeah. And it was listed as a training accident when it was all said and done, but really they were basically kind of pranking on each other. And one of them accidentally pulled the pin, and it was kind of an oh shit situation. When you're in a room with no windows, where do you throw it? If you throw it in the other room, you kill 30 people. You look at the guy you're fucking with and go, damn.
There's a reason why they say close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades.
That's true. Sometimes mortars.
But I know we got to do the thing, but I just wanted to mention quickly that in terms of the two wars that coalesced into the one war to make the Second World War, for us, the really remarkable thing is that there was so little commonality between the European War and the Asian Pacific War. So, to the extent that a lot of people, a lot of really good people who helped us win the European War wanted to go help fight the Asian Pacific War, but there was nothing for him to do because the experience they had gained in Europe, none of it was applicable to the war that we were fighting in the islands of the Pacific and the Philippines and everywhere else. George Patton is the most obvious example. He just wanted to go fight some motherfuckers. They wouldn't let him. There's
Could you
nothing for
imagine Patton and MacArthur in the same room?
Yeah, there's nothing for you to do over there, Georgie. There's no big rolling European plains where you can drive your tanks and push the enemy. It's just not that kind of war. There's really nothing for you to do over there. I'm afraid you're going to have to be the military governor of Bavaria. So good luck.
Good luck.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks ever so much for joining us here on the Blast Radius tonight. Hope you enjoyed the very long and unwieldy monologue. I sure did have fun writing it. Sorry if it was a bit too long and unwieldy, but I bet you don't care because my co-host doesn't care and I don't care either. We hope you have a great tomorrow and a day after that and a fascinating, edifying, satisfying remainder of your week. We will see you back here next Sunday night, 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. As we always do, we will have some more fantastic stuff to talk about. Take care. See you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.